Keanu Reeves receives a letter from Henry, a dying man whose final wish is for Keanu to care for his beloved old dog, Max. Initially hesitant, Keanu takes Max in and soon discovers that Max is not just any dog. He is a retired military K-9 with a haunted past. Through letters left by Henry and the help of Jake, Max's former trainer, Keanu learns that Max once saved lives but still blames himself for the one soldier he couldn't rescue. Determined to free Max from his guilt, Keanu takes him back to the battlefield, where Max finally lets go of his past. In honor of Max's legacy, Keanu opens a sanctuary for retired service dogs. When Max eventually passes, he does so in peace, knowing he is finally home. Did this story touch your heart? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to DG Story for more emotional and inspiring tales. Keanu Reeves sat alone in his dimly lit living room, a steaming cup of tea resting on the wooden table beside him. The evening air was crisp, and the soft hum of the city outside filled the silence. It had been a long day, filled with meetings, rehearsals, and the usual buzz of Hollywood life. Yet, at that moment, his mind wasn't on any of that. His fingers traced the edges of an envelope resting on his lap. A simple, unassuming letter that had found its way to him earlier that morning. He had received countless fan letters throughout his career, but something about this one felt different. It wasn't just the carefully written name on the front, or the old-fashioned wax seal that held it shut. It was something deeper, something almost personal. With a slow, deliberate motion, Keanu opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was shaky, but elegant, as if written by someone who had once been precise but now struggled against time. Dear Mr. Reeves, I hope this letter reaches you. I do not expect a reply, nor do I wish to burden you, but I find myself at the end of my journey, and there is one last thing I must do before I go. My name is Henry Caldwell. I am an old man now, confined to a hospital bed, counting down the days until I take my final breath. I have lived a long life, some of it good, some of it difficult, but through it all, I have never been alone. You see, I have a companion, a loyal friend who has been with me for many years. His name is Max. He is not young anymore, much like myself, and his body bears the marks of time, but his heart is as strong as ever. I do not have family to take him in when I am gone. I have no one I can trust to love him as he deserves. That is why I am writing to you. I have followed your career for many years, and beyond your talent, I have always admired your kindness. I have seen the way you treat people, the way you carry yourself in a world that is often unkind. And I know, perhaps foolishly, that if there is one person who might understand the bond between a man and his dog, it is you. My only wish, my final wish, is that you take Max into your care when I am gone. I know it is an unfair request. You are a busy man, with a life far removed from an old dog's companionship. But if there is even a small part of you that feels the way I do about these creatures who ask for nothing but love, then I hope you will consider it. He will not be with you for long, but in whatever time he has left, he will love you unconditionally. That is the only thing I can promise. Thank you for reading this, even if you do not accept. With gratitude, Henry Caldwell. Keanu exhaled slowly, setting the letter down. The weight of the words lingered in the air, pressing against his chest. He wasn't sure how to react. On one hand, the request was absurd. He had never even met this man, and yet he was being asked to take in a dog, an old one at that. His life was unpredictable, constantly shifting between film sets and commitments. How could he possibly care for an aging pet? And yet, something about the letter tugged at him. Maybe it was the sincerity in Henry's words, or the quiet understanding that came from one dog lover to another. Keanu had always loved dogs. He had grown up with them, and he knew the depth of their loyalty, their unwavering presence in the lives of those who loved them. He glanced at the letter again, his eyes lingering on the name, Max. A soft sigh escaped his lips as he leaned back against the couch. staring at the ceiling. There were 1,000 reasons to say no, but for some reason, all he could think about was saying yes. Keanu Reeves pulled up to a small, quiet house on the outskirts of Los Angeles. It wasn't the kind of place one would expect. No grand estate, no extravagant design, just a humble home with a well-kept front yard and a wooden fence that had seen better days. He stepped out of his car, glancing around. The house carried a certain stillness, the kind that came with time and solitude. Taking a deep breath, he approached the front door and knocked gently. A moment later, the door opened, revealing a woman in her late 30s. She had tired eyes but a kind smile, her dark hair tied back in a loose bun. She wore a simple cardigan over a nurse's uniform. "You must be Mr. Reeves," she said softly. Keanu nodded. "Just Keanu is fine." The woman smiled faintly. "I'm Sarah. I was Mr. Caldwell's nurse for the last few months. He spoke of you often after sending that letter." Keanu felt a small pang in his chest. "I wish I had met him." "He wished that too," Sarah admitted, stepping aside. "But he understood you had your own life. He wasn't one to expect much from others. He just loved that dog." Keanu stepped inside, his eyes scanning the cozy living room. It was filled with books, photographs, and small, personal touches, evidence of a life well lived. But amidst it all, sitting quietly on an old dog bed near the fireplace, was Max. The dog was older than Keanu had expected, a large Labrador mix. His fur was a mix of black and gray, with patches of white around his muzzle. His eyes, dark and deep, held a wisdom that only time could bring. He lifted his head slightly, ears twitching as he studied Keanu. Sarah knelt beside the dog, stroking his back. "Max, this is Keanu. He's here to take care of you now." Max didn't react immediately. He simply stared at Keanu, his expression unreadable. Keanu knelt down, extending his hand. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently. Max sniffed the air, his nose twitching as he took in Keanu's scent. Then, with slow movements, he leaned forward and pressed his muzzle against Keanu's palm. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't hesitation. It was recognition. Keanu felt something shift inside him. Sarah watched quietly before speaking. "He's been waiting by the door every night since Henry passed. I think he was waiting for someone to come." Keanu swallowed, running his fingers through Max's fur. "I won't replace him," he murmured. "But if you'll have me, I'll be here for you." Max blinked slowly, then rested his head against Keanu's knee. Sarah wiped at her eyes. "He trusts you. That's more than he's given anyone since Henry." Keanu exhaled softly, brushing a hand over Max's back. "Then let's go home, buddy." Sarah handed Keanu a bag of Max's belongings, his leash, his favorite blanket, a worn-out tennis ball. But before he could leave, she placed something else in his hand, a small, sealed envelope. "Henry wrote this for you," she said. "He told me to give it to you when you came for Max." Keanu took the envelope, staring at it for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. As he led Max outside, the dog hesitated at the doorstep, glancing back at the house one last time. Keanu knelt beside him. "It's okay, boy. You're not leaving him behind. He's always going to be with you." Max's tail gave a slow, steady wag, and together, they walked toward a new beginning. The drive home was quiet. Max lay in the back seat, his head resting on the folded blanket that had belonged to Henry. His breathing was slow, steady, but Keanu could feel the weight of his sadness in the air. Keanu stole a few glances at him through the rearview mirror. Max wasn't anxious, nor was he particularly restless. He simply stared out of the window, watching the world pass by. When they arrived at Keanu's home, Max hesitated before stepping out of the car. He sniffed the air, his tail still and unmoving. "Come on, buddy," Keanu said softly, giving the leash a gentle tug. Max followed, His steps slow but obedient, Keanu led him inside, watching as Max cautiously explored his new surroundings. The house was spacious, modern but cozy. There was a large open living area, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, and a soft, well-worn couch that Keanu often collapsed onto after long days on set. But Max didn't seem interested in any of it. Instead, he walked straight to the sliding glass doors and sat down, staring outside. Keanu sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had seen this kind of behavior before, dogs mourning their owners, waiting for someone who would never return. He walked over and sat beside Max on the floor. "You miss him, don't you?" he murmured. Max didn't move. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope Sarah had given him. He had almost forgotten about it. He hesitated, then carefully tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Henry's handwriting as shaky as it had been in the first letter. "Dear Keanu, if you're reading this, it means Max is now with you. Thank you. I know it wasn't an easy decision. I know you have a life that doesn't always allow for things like this. But I also know that you are someone who understands love, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. Max is special, not just to me, but in ways you will come to understand. He has seen things, felt things, and lived a life that few would believe. Give him time. He may not show it right away, but he will love you in ways you never expected. And when the time comes, he will teach you something, just as he taught me. Take care of him. With gratitude, Henry." Keanu read the letter twice before folding it carefully and placing it back in the envelope. Max was still staring out the window. Keanu reached out and placed a gentle hand on his back. "I don't know what you've been through, buddy," he said, "but you're safe now." Max finally turned his head, looking at Keanu with those deep, knowing eyes. For the first time that night, his tail moved just slightly, just enough, and Keanu knew that was a start. The days that followed were quiet. Max was neither difficult nor destructive, he was simply there. He followed Keanu from room to room but kept a certain distance, as if unsure of his place in this new life. Keanu gave him space. He made sure Max had everything he needed, his favorite food, a comfortable bed, and plenty of time outside. Yet, the dog remained distant, spending most of his time sitting by the large window, watching the world beyond the glass. It wasn't that Max didn't trust him. It was something deeper. Keanu thought about Henry's words in the letter. "Max is special, not just to me, but in ways you will come to understand." What did that mean? One evening, as Keanu was putting away some of Max's things, he came across an old wooden box. It had been among the belongings Sarah had given him. The lid was slightly worn, the edges chipped from years of use. Curious, Keanu opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some were yellowed with age, others looked more recent. All were addressed to Henry, and many had a small paw print drawn in the corner, as if to mark them as special. Keanu picked up the first letter and carefully unfolded it. July 10th, 2015. Dear Henry, today, Max saved another life. It was a boy this time, lost in the mountains, scared and cold. The rescue team had almost given up, but Max never stops. He found him before the snow did. You should have seen it. Henry, he's more than just a dog. He's a guardian. I don't know what's next for him, but one thing is clear, Max doesn't just belong to one person. He belongs to something greater. Jake. Keanu's brow furrowed. Jake, that name sounded familiar. He quickly reached for another letter. March 3rd, 2017. Henry, I know you've had Max for a few months now, and I hope he's settling in. But there's something I need to tell you. Max wasn't just a rescue dog. He was a military canine. His records were wiped clean after the accident, but I managed to find bits and pieces. He's been in places no dog should ever be. He's seen things that haunt him. If he ever wakes up in the middle of the night, panting or restless, don't be afraid. He's remembering. I trust you. Henry, take care of him. Jake. Keanu slowly lowered the letter. his heartbeat a little faster now. Max wasn't just an ordinary dog. Keanu turned to look at him. The old Labrador was curled up on his bed, eyes half open, ears twitching slightly as if caught in a dream. He had no idea what this dog had been through. Keanu reached for the final letter in the box. Unlike the others, it was in Henry's handwriting. December 22nd, 2023. If anyone is reading this, it means Max has outlived me, and I pray that whoever finds this understands what kind of soul he is. Max has saved lives. He has given everything without ever asking for anything in return. But there's one last thing he needs before his time is up. He needs to find peace. To whoever is reading this, please, help him find it. Henry. Keanu sat in silence. He had taken Max in out of kindness. But now he realized this wasn't just about fulfilling a dying man's last wish. It was about finishing something. He didn't know what yet, but he was going to find out. And he was going to help Max, no matter what it took. Keanu couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with everything he had just read. Max had been a military dog, a rescuer, a guardian, and now he was an old soul carrying the weight of a past no one fully understood. Henry had asked for Max to find peace. But what did that mean? Keanu turned onto his side, glancing toward the foot of the bed where Max lay. The old dog was curled up, his chest rising and falling in slow, rhythmic breaths. But then, just as Keanu was about to close his eyes, Max let out a low whimper. It wasn't the kind of sound a dog made when dreaming of chasing rabbits. It was deeper, a sound of pain. Max twitched, his paws flexed as if running, but his face was tense, his ears flicking back against his skull. Keanu sat up. "Max?" he whispered. Max let out another small cry, his body stiffening for just a second before he jolted awake, his head snapping up. His breathing was fast, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something. Keanu remained still, watching him. Max's gaze finally settled on Keanu, and the dog exhaled sharply. Slowly, he lowered his head back down, though his body remained tense. Keanu reached out and placed a gentle hand on his back. "Bad dreams." "Ha!" Max didn't move, but he didn't pull away either. Keanu sighed. "Me too, buddy." He leaned against the headboard, lost in thought. Henry had mentioned a name in the letters. Jake. If anyone knew what had happened to Max, it was him. The next morning, Keanu made a few calls. He reached out to a friend in the rescue community, explaining that he was trying to find someone who had worked with a retired military dog named Max. It didn't take long before he got a name: Jake Reynolds. According to the information he found, Jake had been a former K-9 trainer, working with rescue and military dogs before retiring. He now ran a small rehabilitation center for working dogs who had aged out of service. Keanu dialed the number he was given. The phone rang twice before a deep, gruff voice answered. "This is Jake." Keanu hesitated for a second. "Hi, my name is Keanu Reeves." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Henry's Keanu?" Keanu blinked. Yeah. I knew you'd call eventually." Jake interrupted. "How's Max?" Keanu glanced at the dog, who was currently sitting by the window, his usual spot. "He's quiet," Keanu admitted, still figuring things out. "I guess." Jake sighed. "Yeah, that sounds like him." Keanu hesitated before asking, "Jake, what happened to Max?" There was a long pause. Then, Jake's voice came through, low and serious. "I don't think you're ready to hear the whole story just yet." Keanu frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Jake said, "that Max isn't just carrying around old memories. He's carrying guilt." Keanu felt a strange chill creep up his spine. "Meet me tomorrow," Jake continued. "Bring Max." Keanu tightened his grip on the phone. "Where?" Jake gave him an address. Then, before Keanu could ask anything else, the line went dead. Keanu hung up and looked at Max. The dog had turned his head slightly, watching him with those dark, knowing eyes. Keanu exhaled. Looks like we're going on a trip, buddy. Max blinked slowly. Then, for the first time since arriving at Keanu's home, his tail wagged. The next morning, Keanu packed a few essentials: water, snacks, Max's leash, and the old wooden box filled with Henry's letters. Something told him he might need them. Max, as usual, was calm, but there was something different in his eyes, as if he knew they were heading somewhere important. The drive was long, taking them out of the city and into the countryside. Keanu followed the GPS until he reached a dirt road leading to a quiet property surrounded by tall trees. A wooden sign at the entrance read, Reynolds K9 Rehabilitation Center. Keanu pulled into the driveway and stepped out, glancing around. The place wasn't large, just a few small cabins, a fenced training area, and a grassy field where a handful of older dogs were roaming freely. The front door to one of the cabins swung open, and a man stepped out. He was in his late 50s, rugged, with a thick beard and sharp blue eyes. He had the posture of a man who had seen and done things most people wouldn't understand. Jake Reynolds. You actually came, Jake said, eyeing Keanu before shifting his gaze to Max. His expression softened. Hey, old boy. Max's ears perked slightly, and for the first time since leaving Henry's house, he moved with intent. He walked toward Jake, sniffing him briefly before sitting down at his feet. Jake crouched, running a hand over Max's head, still carrying the weight. Ha! He murmured. Keanu crossed his arms. You said he's carrying guilt. What did you mean? Jake stood up, exhaling deeply. Come inside. You should hear this sitting down. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of coffee and old books. Jake motioned for Keanu to sit at the worn wooden table while he poured 2 cups of coffee. I trained Max, Jake began, sliding a cup toward Keanu. Back when he was part of a specialized rescue and military K9 unit. Keanu took a sip but said nothing, letting Jake continue. He was the best dog I ever worked with. Smart, fast, loyal to a fault. We put him through every test imaginable, and he aced them all. He was built for search and rescue, for saving people. That's what he was born to do. Jake leaned forward, rubbing his temples. Then came the mission that changed everything. Keanu remained silent. Jake sighed. It was a routine operation, or so we thought. A group of soldiers was trapped in enemy territory after an explosion took out their vehicles. We were sent in to locate and extract them. Max was leading the way. He glanced at Max, who was lying at Keanu's feet, listening. We found them, but something was wrong. Max started acting differently, nervous, pacing. He kept pulling toward one direction, away from the soldiers. I should have listened to him. Jake's jaw tightened. But we ignored his warning. We focused on the mission. And then, the ground exploded beneath us. Keanu's grip on his coffee cup tightened. We had walked right into a trap, a landmine field. Jake said grimly. The explosion took out 2 of our men instantly. I was thrown clear. But the others? He swallowed hard. It was chaos. Keanu looked down at Max, who hadn't moved. His breathing was steady, but there was something in his eyes, a deep, haunted look. Jake continued. Max, he tried to save them. He went back, over and over again. He pulled 3 men to safety before the dust settled. Keanu's chest tightened. But the 4th man, Max couldn't get to him in time. He was too far, and the ground was unstable. We had to pull Max away. Keanu could imagine it, the dog fighting, desperate to go back, not understanding why they were stopping him. Jake let out a slow breath. That was the day Max changed, the day he stopped trusting himself. Keanu frowned. What do you mean? Jake rubbed his forehead. Max never failed before, not once, but in his mind, that soldier's death was his fault. He didn't understand that there was nothing he could have done. Keanu swallowed hard. So he blamed himself. Jake nodded. He shut down after that, stopped eating, stopped responding. The military retired him, labeled him unfit for service. He shook his head. They didn't know what to do with a dog like him, so Henry took him in. Keanu furrowed his brows. Why Henry? Jake smiled faintly. Because Henry was the third soldier Max saved that day. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. Jake leaned back. Henry owed Max his life, and he spent every day after that trying to show him that he hadn't failed. Silence filled the room for a long moment. Keanu finally spoke. Henry said in his letter that Max needed to find peace. Jake nodded. Because Max still doesn't believe he did enough. He's still carrying that soldier's death on his shoulders. Keanu looked down at Max. The dog was resting his head against Keanu's foot, his body still. But Keanu knew better now. He understood why Max sat by the window every night, why he was so distant, why he had that look in his eyes. He was still waiting, still grieving. Keanu took a deep breath. So what do I do? Jake studied him. You do what Henry couldn't. Keanu frowned. Which is? Jake's voice was firm. You show him that he deserves to let go. Keanu exhaled slowly, placing a hand on Max's back. All right, he murmured. I'll do whatever it takes. And for the first time since leaving Henry's house, Max closed his eyes not from exhaustion, but from something else entirely. Trust. The drive back home was different. Max sat in the passenger seat this time, no longer curled in the back like a silent shadow. His body was still, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. But Keanu could feel it, the shift, the subtle change in the air. Max wasn't just an old dog anymore. He was a soldier carrying a burden too heavy for one soul to bear. Keanu tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had taken Max in because of Henry's final wish. But now, this wasn't just about honoring a promise. It was about saving Max just like Max had saved so many before. That night, Keanu did something different. Instead of letting Max sit alone by the window, he grabbed the old dog's leash and clipped it on. Come on, buddy, we're going out. Max blinked, confused. Keanu had taken him on walks before, but something in Keanu's tone told him this was different. The two of them stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Keanu led Max away from the quiet, away from the stillness Max had grown too comfortable with. They walked through the city, passing groups of people, the distant hum of life filling the space around them. Max stayed close but alert, his ears flicking at the sounds of the street. It was clear. This wasn't a dog who had spent his life in a backyard. Keanu stopped at a small park, one that overlooked the city skyline. He took a seat on a bench, letting Max sit beside him. For a long moment, they both just sat there, watching the world move. Then, Keanu spoke. I know what it feels like, he said softly. Max's ear twitched, but he didn't move. Keanu exhaled. Losing people. Blaming yourself for something you had no control over. Max's breathing slowed. Keanu glanced at him. You think if you had just done one thing differently, everything would have changed. That maybe they'd still be here. Max didn't react, but Keanu knew he was listening. I used to think like that too, Keanu admitted. For a long time, his fingers traced the edge of Max's leash. But you know what I've learned? Max turned his head slightly, just enough to meet Keanu's gaze. You can't change what happened, Keanu said. No matter how many times you replay it in your head, no matter how much you wish you could go back. He reached down, resting a hand on Max's back. But you can decide what you do with what's left. Max blinked, his body unusually still. Keanu gave him a small smile. Henry knew that. That's why he wanted you to find peace. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then slowly, carefully, Max leaned into Keanu's side. Keanu let out a slow breath, running his fingers through the old dog's fur. This was the first step. The next morning, Keanu woke up with a plan. If Max had been trained for rescue work, then maybe, just maybe, bringing him back to what he knew could help him move forward. So instead of their usual quiet routine, Keanu drove them to a private training field outside the city, one he had rented for the day. Max stepped out of the car, sniffing the air. His tail flicked once, just barely. Keanu grabbed a tennis ball from his bag. "All right, buddy, let's see what you've got." He tossed the ball. For a moment, Max didn't move. Then, something clicked. His ears perked, his muscles tensed, and then he ran. Keanu watched in awe as Max sprinted after the ball with precision. Moving like a dog half his age, he caught it mid-bounce, then trotted back to Keanu, tail wagging. Keanu grinned. Not bad for an old guy. Max dropped the ball at Keanu's feet. Looking up expectantly, Keanu picked it up. "Oh, you're in this now. Ha!" This time, he threw it farther. Max took off, and for the first time since Henry's death, he looked happy. Keanu felt something swell in his chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe Henry had been right. Max didn't need a quiet retirement. He needed to feel alive again, and Keanu was going to make sure he did. For the next few days, something changed. Max was different, not completely, not all at once, but in ways that only someone watching closely would notice. He didn't sit by the window as much. He started greeting Keanu in the mornings with a small wag of his tail. He even brought the tennis ball to Keanu unprompted, something he hadn't done before. It wasn't just about play. It was about trust. But there was still something, a wall that hadn't fully come down, and Keanu knew there was only one way to break through it. One evening, Keanu picked up the phone and called Jake. "I need you to take me there," he said. Jake was silent for a moment. Then, "You sure?" "Yes," a sigh. "All right, meet me tomorrow. And bring Max." The drive was long. Keanu sat in the passenger seat of Jake's truck while Max lay in the back, his breathing slow and steady. Jake didn't talk much at first. Then, as they neared their destination, he finally spoke. "I don't know if this will help," Jake admitted. "Bringing him back." Keanu glanced at Max. "I think he needs to face it." Jake exhaled. "Then let's hope you're right." They pulled up to the edge of a vast, open field, one that had long since been cleared of danger. But the scars of the past remained. Max stepped out of the truck. The moment his paws touched the ground, he froze. His ears went back. His body stiffened. His breathing became shallow. Keanu knelt beside him. "Hey, buddy, you're okay." Max's eyes darted around. His muscles were tense, ready to move, to run, to react. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out Henry's last letter. He unfolded it carefully and began reading aloud. "Max, if you're hearing this, then it means you've lived longer than I did. And I'm glad, because you deserve more time." Max's ears twitched. "But you need to stop waiting for me, and you need to stop waiting for him." Max's breathing slowed just slightly. "You did everything you could, and you saved me. That's enough." Keanu's voice softened. "It's okay to let go." And then something happened. Max closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were no longer haunted. Slowly, he stepped forward. One paw at a time, he walked into the field. No hesitation, no fear. He walked as if he was finally free. Keanu watched as Max sniffed the air, took in the space around him. Then, for the first time in years, Max lifted his head and howled. Not in sorrow, not in pain, but in release. Keanu smiled. "Good boy." Max turned, trotted back to Keanu, and for the first time, he leaned into him, not out of exhaustion, but out of trust. Keanu wrapped an arm around him. "Let's go home, buddy." And this time, Max didn't look back. Part 9, the final goodbye. The drive home was silent, but this time, it was different. Max no longer stared out the window like a dog waiting for someone who would never return. He no longer carried the weight of ghosts from a past he couldn't change. Instead, he rested his head on Keanu's lap, his breathing steady, his body at peace. Keanu ran a hand through Max's fur, feeling the warmth beneath his fingers. "You did good today, buddy," he murmured. Max's tail thumped lightly against the seat. For the first time since Henry's death, Max looked lighter, and for the first time, Keanu allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Max had finally found peace. A week later, Keanu found himself sitting in his backyard with Max lying beside him. The sky was clear, a deep shade of blue stretching endlessly above them. Keanu had been thinking a lot about Henry's final wish, about what it truly meant to help Max find peace. And then, an idea came to him. He pulled out his phone and made a call. 2 weeks later, Keanu stood in front of a large gated property. One that had once been abandoned but was now being transformed into something new. A place for retired working dogs, rescued, rehabilitated, and given the love they deserved after years of service. Keanu had named it Max's Legacy, and as the first few dogs arrived, rescued military K-9s, retired search and rescue heroes, old souls who had spent their lives saving others, Max was there to greet them, because Max wasn't just an old dog. He was a survivor, a leader, a guardian, and now he had a new mission, not to save lives, but to teach others how to live. Months passed. Max thrived in his new role. He spent his days roaming the grounds, watching over the dogs that came through the gates. Keanu never left his side. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Max lay beside Keanu on the porch. His breathing was slow, steady. Keanu reached down, stroking his fur. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. Max exhaled softly, his tail giving one final wag. Keanu felt it before he saw it. The stillness, the quiet. Max had given everything he had to the world, and now he could rest. Keanu closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't sad, because Max hadn't died carrying the weight of his past. He had died free, and in the end, that was all Henry had ever wanted for him. Years later, the sanctuary grew, welcoming hundreds of dogs who had spent their lives in service. And at the heart of it all was a statue, a tribute to one dog who had given everything without ever asking for anything in return. Engraved at the base were just a few simple words: Max, a hero, a friend, a guardian. Keanu stood before it, a soft smile on his face. Then, as if carried by the wind itself, he swore he heard it, a single, peaceful howl. And he knew Max was finally home,